Hello and welcome, Exiles. Today I want to talk about the Archmage Stormweaver. How did it fare after the patch notes? There were a lot of very big changes, and a lot of them were expected. Number one is Archmage. The biggest change to the character was instead of saying gain 5 to 6% based on your levels and then being able to add quality, it now says gain 3%. For most of our characters on the high end, this meant you could get Archmage to go all the way up to 9% because you could get a level 21 or 22 gem, and that would give you the gain 7% threshold. And then with quality, you get to gain 9%. This is roughly a 66% damage nerf. Ultimately, it's a bit less than that because you still have to consider your base damage. So it's somewhere in the range of 60% less to 66% less damage. Roughly thereabouts is probably about how it shakes out for your character, depending on how much mana you had, how end game you were with your character. A sizable damage nerf, but we have to remember this character was instant wiping the hardest content in the game. So if you take 60% damage off of that, is it still viable? And the answer is, I would think yes. Just doing a 66% damage nerf, this character is still pretty easily, in my opinion, killing all endgame content. But they didn't just nerf Archmage. They nerfed a lot more things. They gave it the GGG triple tap. Another big nerf was to Eldritch Battery. That said, hey man, if you're going to click Eldritch Battery and get all this ridiculous mana, we're going to double your mana cost. Now, this is a fairly sizable change in that I believe with this character right now, we have a character set up that has Eldritch Battery. In my mind, this is enough to warrant not clicking Eldritch Battery. It's enough to say, hey, maybe we shouldn't click that. It's probably going to be a bit too rough on mana sustain, I believe. Enough to this extent where it would start making your character just get ripped because you'd spend all your mana down and then get hit and die. So I think this is another noticeable damage nerf because you're getting less mana scaling. Ultimately, this is a defensive buff for our character because it makes the choice for us in a way that we don't click Eldritch Battery, which means we have an energy shield pool, which means we can be tankier. That's kind of how I read this change is we're going to lose offensive power and gain back defensive power. Like, for example, this character is a full offensive spec currently. What we would end up doing, right now I have no ES nodes for context, but we would end up dropping a node like this, and we'd lose about, I think it's roughly 2,000 mana between, no, not 2,000 mana. Oh, I weapon swapped. I was like, why does this not look right? Okay, hold on. Let me do that again. We're at 6,000 mana, and then we would go to 4,000. So it's like an 1,800 mana drop or whatever. It's a 30%-ish less mana. It's a sizable drop in your mana, and that is killing your, or not killing, but it's another reduction in damage, which I think is probably pretty fair. So we have the Archmage nerf, and we have the Eldritch Battery nerf. Those are two fairly sizable nerfs to damage, but it didn't stop there. We have now a Stormweaver nerf. Now, looking at this right here where it says Arcane Surge Effect, this is the biggest change. I think that's a nerf to the Stormweaver is Arcane Surge Effect being made weaker. This affects basically your cast speed and your mana regen. Ultimately, if we're dropping Eldritch Battery, I'm probably going to suggest dropping Mind Over Matter, which is a net mana sustain buff. So what ends up happening here is you trade off, you lose mana sustain, which I don't think ends up mattering if you're not clicking Mind Over Matter. But the main thing you're losing is you're losing a bit of your cast speed. Along with the lower mana amount, that also is losing you scaling with this node. So that's another damage nerf. So we have 66% less damage with Archmage, probably 20 to 30% less damage due to Eldritch Battery, and then probably another maybe 10% less damage due to Force Will. So you can start adding these up in your mind and try to get an idea of what we're talking about here. The next nerf is to Strikes Twice and Scouring Winds. Scouring Winds gets its exposure amount lowered pretty significantly, whereas Strike Twice makes the shock magnitude 25% less. Ultimately, what I think this means is you still click Strike Twice. Strike Twice is probably still worth it. Or potentially you just go for Elemental Storms. Elemental Storms did not get nerfed at all, and they were pretty decent from my testing early on with this character. Before I went to a min-maxed full DPS setup, the Elemental Storms were actually quite decent, I thought. In which case, those didn't get nerfed, whereas both of these nodes did. It could be an option worth considering. Ultimately, if our damage is lowered enough where the boss fight lasts a certain amount of seconds, that's when I felt Elemental Storm was comparable. If our damage was low enough that it would actually last a duration and the Elemental Storm, excuse me, would actually get to stack up damage, then it was comparable, I thought, to these nodes or similar-ish. The only reason I ended up swapping out of them is because our damage was so high, we would just insta-kill the boss and Elemental Storm wouldn't even have a chance to deal damage. But now, if they're significantly nerfing these two nodes, that is another option which will still work. So ultimately, I think the biggest nerf is here. And then these, I think, pushes you towards doing Elemental Storm because they're lowering our damage in other cases, which means Elemental Storm probably will have enough time to deal damage. Ultimately, I still think this is a case where you're killing a boss pretty quickly, but within more reason, not the situation where you don't even know what the boss does because they die before the mechanics occur, that sort of thing. And then the 4% mana, increased mana now becomes 12% increase. This is another little bit of a extra kick in the knees or shins, so to speak, to our overall mana count and the overall amount of gain damage we're getting out of it. Okay, rest in peace. So that is the Stormweaver changes. Do I think it makes Stormweaver not the correct tendency to go? That I am not sure about. I think Stormweaver is probably still the correct ascendancy for a league start, but I'm starting to see an argument for going Gemling Legionnaire, maybe late game is more the choice, because Gemling Legionnaire also got a fairly sizable buff, I would say, in the integrated efficiency change here. I think this is a fairly strong node now, and I think you might be considering this as an option. They also got their attributes nerfed, so we'll see where it shakes out. Ultimately, I want to do a test after the patch goes live to test some of these changes, to go over them. But anyways, let's go on to another nerf that happened as well to the build, another sizable one, which is the change to Everlasting Gaze. This no longer causes you to gain 20 to 30%. It now causes you to gain 4 to 6% mana as extra energy shield. In my mind, this basically makes this an amulet you just don't click anymore. Maybe you use it on like your level 1 character trying to get through, you know, the first act of the campaign or something. Like early game. But late game, you will want a rare amulet. It's making the decision for you. We can't click Eldritch Battery, or I don't think we can afford Eldritch Battery mana-wise anymore. So in my mind, I think this pushes you towards the angle of going rare amulet with plus levels and damage scaling. You lose Eldritch Battery, but you get back some of the damage because you have a damage amulet now. But you lose Everlasting Gaze. So there's that like trade occurring, I think is the situation. You're dropping Eldritch Battery, you're dropping Everlasting Gaze, you're picking up a damage like +3 amulet with mana, percent mana, stuff like that. That's the sort of thing I think is changing with the character. All right, so those are all of the biggest notable changes that are really just targeted Archmage. Let's talk about a more generic nerf, which is to every build in the game, because this belt dominated every single character's gear slot pretty much, which is Ingenuity, the unique belt that had increased bonuses from rings. This was one of those things where you got it in the end game of the character. You put this belt on and your character just skyrocketed through the roof in terms of power. And now they are nerfing it from 40 to 80% increased bonuses of each ring to independent rolls 20 to 30, which means it's going to be really pretty hard to get a good roll on this thing. Does it still beat a rare belt? 30%, 30% at a maximum roll. I think it's close, but it's also like, why would you spend the money getting a perfect roll type of thing? There's probably other upgrades you could spend better money on. If you have a corruption that is like a perfect corruption where it goes like 37, 37, 36, 36, whatever the number ends up being, that probably just beats a rare belt still. But it is still funny to me. But yeah, that's another thing where this isn't just a nerf to Archmage specifically. This is a nerf to every build in the game, because every build in the game was using this belt, because this belt was just OP. It's just a bunch of stats more than you could get on a normal belt, and it wasn't particularly interesting. So hopefully that covers the majority of all of the random little nerfs to the build. There are a few different random little buffs. For example, Warriors Invictus, the chest piece I have on my character right now, which is probably the chest piece I'd recommend. 5% mana, 10 spirit, allows you to go cast on shock. Also, I will say another change to Archmage, we can now do cast on shock easier. With a Warriors Invictus, you get 50 spirit from that. If they have 10% reduced reservation on Archmage, that means we only need 50 extra spirit to get a cast on shock. That makes that like an easier acquisition, if that makes sense. Warriors Invictus got buffed. It now has 3 random modifiers. So we could have on this chest piece something like max mana, spirit, and all res, right? So there are some things we're getting back power-wise, but I want to just level the playing field in terms of like going over all the different changes that happen to the character. Ultimately, I think the character has gotten a fairly sizable nerf in the range of 70%. Like I'd say 70% weaker damage wise, probably tankier than our current version. That's what I would say is maybe closer to 80% damage nerf. It's a fairly sizable nerf, but the thing is, if you have a kill time on an endgame boss that is straight up 2 seconds, and you cut off 80% damage, that 2-second kill time might go to 10 seconds to 20 seconds. That's still like, you're almost ignoring the fight. So the biggest thing overall, I think the biggest takeaway from this is I think on the high end, like if you have good gear, the character is still probably one of those builds. It's where it's like, hey, you put all this gear together, you deserve to be strong. But on the low end, when you're starting the character, the weaker portion of the character, when you're on your early game of the character, I'm not sure it's going to hold up quite as well. That's why I'm a little bit nervous right now. So going forward, I will end up talking to the Max guys, getting other people's opinions about it too. I'm leaning towards either putting a big warning label or delisting the build until I can properly test it to verify these things, which I want to wait until the patch is actually live. I'm thinking before the patch goes live, if I can get enough time. We literally only have like a day until league start, so I'm not sure if I have enough time, but I would probably like to set up a pseudo setup based on these changes that are happening. So once the patch goes live, I can do a quick map test with it and boss test with it and say, okay, if I was going to have this current character now, based on these changes, this is how the build performs, to showcase the build and its current power after the nerfs. That's what I'm thinking in my head. Tentatively, I think it's probably still a decent build late game, but I'm not confident in it being a build I'd recommend on league start. And I'm definitely not confident overall as saying, if you played it before, it's definitely not going to feel the same after. It's a sizable nerf. Oh, you know what? I just realized I didn't go over one more nerf that occurred, which was to Spark specifically. Spark got its projectile count reduced. Basically, Spark had up to, 18 projectiles at level 20. Now it's going to be 9 projectiles, so its projectile number got cut in half, and it got a little bit higher proj speed. It got changed from 0 to 19 to 0 to 30 based on quality. What I believe this ends up meaning is mostly a clear speed nerf. It will hit single target to some extent, but I'm not sure how much. The reason being is Spark it has a hit rate limit, as in Spark can only hit an enemy every 0.66 seconds. So say I cast Spark, all the projectiles are bouncing around the arena. The likelihood a projectile hits the enemy perfectly when the timer is up, that 0.66 timer, is much higher the more projectiles that are in the arena. That being said, if you already have a decent amount of projectiles and you're already shooting pretty fast, maybe my average hit time for 10 projectiles, let's say that's 0.8 seconds, and my average hit time for 22 projectiles is 0.68 or 9, or, like, I'm not sure if I'm making sense exactly how I'm saying this. It will lower the consistency for how fast you hit the enemy consistently at that hit rate or whatever, but I'm not sure it will be... this isn't like a 50% damage nerf. It's a 50% clear speed nerf. The clear speed was way overtuned. It's probably still very good for clear speed. But this is one of those things where I have a hard time quantifying it without actually playing it and feeling it out. And that's just part of the thing where I want to do a playtest after this goes live to get a comparison for this versus the change to Spark. Hopefully that makes some sense. Hopefully we've gone over all the important things. Yeah, that should cover the basics of all the things that changed for Spark itself. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video going over the various buffs, not buffs, just various nerfs to Spark. I guess More Ears Invictus is a buff, right? An endgame chess piece that you won't have for a really long time. Anyways, yeah, that's the Archmage changes. I'm going to be going over on stream more in depth on the patch notes. I haven't really read all of them. I just kind of jumped around to specific things that related to Spark just to see, hey, yo, okay, I know this amulet's OP. I know Everlasting Gaze is OP. Did they nerf it? Yep, they did. Did they nerf Archmage? Check. Yep, they did. I went over the basics. There's definitely going to be some stuff in here that maybe buffs, maybe nerfs that I missed throughout the patch notes. But I just wanted to go over the specific stuff that I thought were obvious targets that I think GGG would nerf. And check. GGG is feeling like they're a lot more back to being willing to nerf than I thought. I was getting the mentality of feeling they weren't going to be willing to nerf a lot of stuff, and they actually came through and did nerf quite a few things in fairly significant ways. Let me know what you guys think of the patch notes so far, and yeah, we'll be streaming it later today. As always, thanks for watching, Exiles. Take care, and peace out. Have a good one.